analytics.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. If you haven't figured out yet, I do work for Encoder. If, got the logo on the shirt and on the screen here. And what are we? We're a direct data platform. And so, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. I want to talk about some other things. So for those of you who who are interested in backgrounds on how to contact or keep in touch, I would love to keep in touch with you. So you can find me on Twitter. If you just want to reach out, feel free. I'm pretty responsive. Just a kind of brief background. I kind of mentioned before I worked at Oracle. I actually spent a number of years there. I was actually a financials, applications and procurement architect for Oracle e-business suite and for Oracle Cloud ERP. Worked at Microsoft, came back to Oracle, and then we founded Encoder back at the kind of right at the end, very beginning of 2014. Now, for some of you, you're going to really want to know where we're going to go. And I want to make sure that you've got a very clear agenda on what I'm going to be discussing and all the things I'm going to be talking about. So we will talk about sheep. We will talk about should I wear black or gray, dining in Seattle, throwing metal balls at car windows, decision pyramids, bipartisan accounting, Larry Ellison and 90s design, millennials on a wall and in a data warehouse, what to do when you get an F grade, social dilemma, Fitbit Napa, why I cannot get car insurance, bulldozers and Formula One, Baja, Data 3.0, fireplaces, logs, and chit chat. And that's going to be done in 30 minutes or less. So it's going to be a wild ride. Buckle up and here we go. So you might notice I have a bit of an accent. I'm not from these parts. Well, I'm originally from Wales. Wales is a country with more sheep than people. This is a photo I took back when I was living in Wales. And that's where the sheep comes from, and that's where my accent comes from. So in case you have any questions, now we've settled that. Hopefully you'll understand everything I'm saying, but here, let's keep moving. So one of the problems that I talked about is this whole term about data-driven. And actually, I don't really like the term data-driven. And one of the reasons is it really isn't about being data-driven. It's about making decisions and really understanding the decision process and where data plays into that process. Being data-driven just kind of makes it sound like you're just along for the ride and you're sitting in the back seat and everything's just happening. But in reality, it's making decisions. And some of those decisions are automated. Some of those decisions are closed loop. They'll happen in an AI-based system, maybe thousands of decisions being made for you per second. And then some of these decisions, though, are big decisions. Some of these are more strategic decisions. And how does data play into that? So one thing I want to admit and kind of just put on the table is decisions are hard. They're very hard. And let's just say that, right? There's ways in which we can talk about that. So first of all, these two men had one thing in common, and that is that they both, when it came to what clothes to wear, decided that they weren't going to make that decision every day because it was hard. It was hard to go into their wardrobe and decide. So they just wore the same clothes every single day. It was their uniform. They probably had 30, 40 of each type of shirt. But that was their approach because they wanted to make sure that their decision-making muscle wasn't fatigued by the time they even got to the office deciding what to eat. Because to them, those were not important questions. Those were not important decisions. They wanted their decisions to be driven around strategic things in their business that only they could answer and the only things that they could unblock and move forward. So should you wear black? Should you wear gray? Well, just make the decision once and then never have to make it every single day. Another one, decisions. An example, I remember being out in Seattle and I was like, should we go out to eat tonight? Not sure what we should eat though. So I had this conversation and went through, I looked at some restaurants, figured, okay, well, it'd be kind of fun to go and maybe eat this place, Sushi Kashiba. If you've ever been to Seattle, I thoroughly recommend Sushi Kashiba. But someone else responds back, I don't know, there might be a better place. I'm like, what do you mean a better place than Sushi Kashiba? It has 1,029 views and 4.5-star rating. Whoops, sorry, pressed the wrong button. A little too anxious here. But 1,000 ratings with 4.5 stars. Sounds too good to be true. Great restaurant. Surely this is going to be the place that we want to stay at or eat at. And so really in reality, though, we have this fear of missing out. It's pretty good, but we're only here for 2 days. Maybe there's something bad. Should we keep looking? And then you might find yourself keep looking. And it's pretty frustrating. Tesla realizes that this decision making is hard, to the fact that deciding where to eat, we've decided to, like, you know what, I don't want to make the decision. Let my car make the decision. So they introduced this capability of just saying, I'm feeling hungry. You tell me where to go eat, and let's just go eat there. Or I don't even know where to go. So Tesla, you take me there. Of course, one day it might even just drive you there as well. But even for Tesla, decisions are hard. Deciding whether to throw a metal ball at bulletproof glass in your unveiling of your latest Cybertruck is a decision that they made. And the first decision had some consequences. They thought, that's not so good. But then they had another decision to make. Even though they'd thrown this ball many times before and this had never happened, do they throw it a second time to prove a point? And so they made a decision based upon the information they had. They threw it. And if you were familiar with the unveiling event, the same thing happened to that window that happened to the first window. And so this decision making is very, very difficult. But ultimately, this is kind of the pyramid where decisions take place. First of all, you have to comprehend the situation. So if we took the Tesla example, the comprehension would have been, well, we've thrown this ball 70 times at this window in rehearsal. It never once broke. So this must be a freak one-off. What are the chances that that would happen a second time? Maybe, that was part of the decision. Then at a certain point, they had conviction. They said, you know what? We know that this works. We know that this is going to happen. We have the data. We're throwing the ball multiple times, and this has never happened. But until they did that commitment, nothing changed. Until they actually threw the ball, that decision wasn't complete. You can have all the comprehension, but if you don't have conviction and commitment, a decision has yet to be made. And so when I think about the journey of data, I like to break it down into these terms. Now, data 1.0, you might have been familiar with web, and then we had web 2.0. Well, data 1.0 is the term that I affectionately call how we used to run our business. When I started out at Oracle, we used to use databases, and we would create data to support those businesses. We'd create data to help people run their business. So if you were a store owner, you would have transactions. People would come in and buy copious amounts of toilet paper or new big flat screen TVs. And then you'd have to take those transactions and put them into a spreadsheet or put them into an application that would track those for you into an ERP system. And so we'd start to write those down. You'd write down the customer, the products they used, what was there. Reality, this kind of works, but it'd be very frustrating if you had to write down the customer's name every single time versus just being able to refer to their IDs, for example. And so what we ended up doing is creating these systems, these debits and credits. We'd have to have accounts. We'd have accounts receivable, accounts payable. You'd have a supplier. You'd have an invoice from them. You'd need to pay them. So you'd incur every single transaction would have an equal and opposite transaction in a different account. We'd go through these processes, and the database was fantastic. And we generated tons of data to help us in this space. And as we'd go through this, we'd cut checks and we'd make sure our books were balanced. Everything was great. The database was amazing because it didn't make mistakes. It wouldn't make mistakes. We still could potentially make mistakes, but it helped us with our data integrity. And so we're able to bring data to the process. So data 1.0 helped us as the lifeblood of our organizations create these processes to create a way for businesses to run. And so when we'd look at this, just a single transaction of maybe just having an invoice, receiving some product, and then sending out a check, we'd end up with these balanced transactions on the debits and credits. You'd always have to have an equal and opposite debit and credit, and we'd go through this process. And so that was what I would say data 1.0. It was those relational databases, lots of valuable data to be had in them. And a bunch of applications use this. They build this. They generate this data 1.0 data set, if you like. Whether it's Salesforce or Oracle, ServiceNow, they're all generating relational data sets. They're creating these data for us to be able to ensure that our businesses run smoothly, kind of the processing takes place. But when it came to asking questions of that data, it became really difficult. And this was a question that I remember when I worked for Larry Ellison, he asked. He used to stand up in the late 90s and he would say questions like, I have this company, we have everything, but I can't even answer questions like, how many employees do I have? It'll take 2 weeks for that answer to come back. And when it does, it's no longer the right answer. So we've never really had a finger on his pulse on the pulse on how many questions do I have? Or how many employees do I have? I think he might have had other questions now if he's looking at this video and he saw it today, and it might be just, who approved this background? And, it really kind of dates some of the stuff that we do. Hopefully my background here will age a little better. But when we think about that data and those kind of questions, we're gonna have a little challenge here. So take a look at this image and try and remember really, really hard and see if you can remember as much about it as you can. Now, I want to think of this as data. Think of this as being the richness of all the data that it actually does exist in data 1.0. So there's all this information that you can have, but you just can't see it. And so you say, okay, I want to start down my journey of being able to understand this data. So we say, let's bring in an EDW, the Enterprise Data Warehouse. And this is kind of what happens. 6 months later, after a few $1 million or so, maybe even a year, you end up getting something that looks like this. And it's like, great, now I know what I'm looking at, because before I never had that. I never saw that image that I showed you. It was kind of trapped. I could see little pieces of it, but I couldn't see the whole thing. And so now we can start to answer questions. We know there's 5 people and they work at the circus and they sit on a tightrope and they like to drink coffee. But in reality, there's questions I can't answer. What happens if new questions come in? Because up front, you have to make these limiting decisions on what of the data was relevant to you. What did you want to know about it? So when you say, how many were wearing hats? You're like, oh, I don't know. How many were wearing hats? Well, how many were wearing scarves? And then you start to think, well, whoa, that's interesting. Even if you do get the answers to those questions, and then someone comes back and says, well, 2 of them are wearing hats and 3 of them wearing scarves. Then when you say, well, how many were wearing hats and scarves? I should know the answer to that. Well, actually, you don't, because you don't have the information at the right granular level. You actually have it at an aggregate level. So we still don't know. And this just keeps going on and on. How many have hats with lace-up shoes? You don't understand how many have hats and scarves. All of this becomes very, very frustrating to the user, to the business. And so there's no surprise that in reality, when we look at what's been happening in the world of data, that really there's not a lot of great news. When I went back and looked at what happened from over a decade ago, these are some of the reports that came out that really don't give a great good feel, right? If you're going to say, hey, embark on your BI project, only a 70%, 77% chance that it'll actually will fail. It's like, okay, so you need to be in the 13%. Got it. Great. Thanks very much. That sounds wonderful. Or in the 87% rather, or the 23% for the 77%. So ultimately, I would say that gives us an F grade. And let's be honest, I think to some degree it's deserved. Now there's reasons for it, so I'm not going to blame anyone. I was part of this, so I get the F grade too. I'm not finger pointing, but in reality, this is kind of what I would say. And I would actually say it's more than that. It's if you were ever had in school and you actually had red pen written on your papers, it might be a big fat F with a big box around it. That's kind of what it felt. And that's kind of a lot of the measures and metrics that we have out there. So why do this? What is going on? Well, there's another metric that just says for the last 10 years, we've not been failing. Something very peculiar is taking place. The actual way in which we're investing and VCs are investing in cloud data services, in analytics and data providers, has had a 17x growth. This is really, really hot. Data's become really exciting. In many ways, it's become the business model for our businesses. In many ways, they're looking at what can they do? And we see this trend continuing. And probably all of us have just seen the interest in data over the last decade. Why is that? Well, I would put it down to, it actually was data 2.0. Data 2.0 is what really was the flywheel to get people reintroduced and energized about data. What is data 2.0? Well, data 2.0 really took off with a lot of things. There's many different pieces of this, but one of them you could just think about is the data capture device that all of us are walking around with, our phones. Here's an example where just looking at what my phone is capturing about me whenever I go and travel, or when I was, where I am, it takes down all this information and it captures it. And this can be used for good and for bad. In the social dilemma, it kind of says, hey, maybe this stuff is, going to destroy us to some degree. But in reality, there's a lot of things that are going on that actually are very good about this data. It's not all doom and gloom. But one example is this. I'm actually not far from Napa. And back a few years ago, I remember being woken from my sleep with a jolt, and my bed was shaking, and there was an earthquake. And it was interesting because for the first time, this was a significant earthquake in the Bay Area that had happened when people had had smart devices. And so there was a number of things that could be captured about the earthquake that before we couldn't get. without having the level of sensors that we had by people having phones or having Fitbits. And so, example at that time was like Jawbone, and Jawbone actually released their data on how people who were sleeping with their jawbone were affected by the earthquake. And so you can see very quickly, here's a line that shows how people are falling asleep. So what we say here is, 100% of people almost are awake at 9 p.m. And then you can see how people fall asleep. Most people by 1 a.m. there's about 30% of people already asleep. And then you can see we get down to like 18% or so. And then just after 3 a.m., boom, a big jump where everyone kind of wakes up. Some people actually manage to sleep through it, which is the big question to me, is like, how is that not everybody in those areas didn't wake up? But that's pretty amazing. But you can see how we see how people felt it and where they felt it the further they were away. So here, Santa Cruz, further away from Napa, you can see there wasn't a whole ton of people feeling it. But Sacramento, San Jose, you can definitely see people felt that. So it's very interesting there to just see how that data can help us respond and understand what's going on around us. Here's another one. I look at Tesla and you might say, okay, that's as a Tesla. What's interesting about the Tesla, though, is you think about it as a data capture device again. In the same way as our phones kind of transformed the data that can be captured, now we can start to track data in many useful and interesting ways. The car is the same thing. A lot of people ask, like, is Tesla overpriced? Well, if you just think of Tesla as a car company, I would say it is overpriced. But if you think of Tesla as a data platform, maybe it's not. And so here's some examples of some of the services and products we can start to provide in this kind of world. You think about Tesla offering insurance. So you can go in and I type in my insurance and put in my information. And of course, then it can analyze my driving. And then it can go and figure out, how fast does Matthew drive? How fast does he accelerate and brake and turn and corner? And they can analyze my data. And you probably want all your dots to be really close to that 0, 0 axis, meaning you're not putting a lot of G's in either direction. In reality, if you're someone who likes to enjoy the car because you bought it because it's fast, you'll probably end up with a premium that looks something like this. And you'll be like, I don't want this insurance. But they know exactly your risk rate because it wasn't just a few questions they asked you over the phone. They knew exactly how your car is being used. And so it kind of changes the products and offerings that you can have. And again, on the other side, if you're a safe driver, if you don't do a lot of these things, potentially you get a much cheaper insurance than you would. So if we were to compare data 1.0 and data 2.0, there's a few attributes that I think help us understand what are the differences. So one of the things in data 1.0, we kind of established things need to be accurate. When it comes to accounting data, you can't be like, well, it's kind of an approximation. Your auditor is not going to be cool with it's an approximation. In data 2.0, an approximation can work really well. You don't need every single data point. You can kind of have trends and look at that, and that's fine. Your source formats tend to be different. Data 1.0 is largely 3NF, third normalization form. That's where we have lots of tables and relationships and complexity. Data 2.0 tends to be more flattened data. Data prep in 1.0 is extensive. And in 2.0, it's intensive. And you go, Matthew, well, are those any different? I don't think they're any different. They're both as difficult, but they're slightly different in terms of what you actually have to do. But data sharding in 1.0 is very inefficient. But in data 2.0, it's highly efficient, meaning all of the data that you need to be able to do a massively parallel computation on a query is actually really good in data 2.0. And this is why data 2.0, I think, really took off, is because we had a lot of technologies at our fingertips that enabled us to cut data into pieces and to run it over multiple machines and then bring it back together. Think, the introduction of this with Google and some of the MPP work that they have done. In the primary data cases, they're slightly different though. Business data was the big driver in data 1.0. Of transactions lived and breathed by this data. Whereas in data 2.0, it really was signal data. It was how do I create an experience that's really customized. Maybe it's how do I figure out what material to put in front of someone. Maybe it's what video to watch next, or maybe it's what products they might be interested in. Those are data 2.0 issues. Updates are something you live and breathe in a data 1.0 world. Updating customer transactions happens all the time. And in data 2.0, largely it's not. It's an append event. When the event happens, it's happened. We don't go back and say, let's update that event. We just create new events and we just add and add and it keeps going on and we just append to that data. And so closed loop decision making is something that really we don't do in Data 1.0. What I mean by that is we don't have decisions being made for us on our behalf. But in Data 2.0, it is. That's why when you go on YouTube, you get a very personal experience because there's an algorithm deciding what videos you should watch next and suggest what those should be. In Data 1.0, we're not doing that. We're largely relying on people to engage with that data and to make those decisions. And so one other way to think about it is Data 1.0 felt very much like a bulldozer. It was very difficult. It was very hard. And so people didn't do so much with it. These projects were very drawn out. Nobody talked about data being super fast or things being done instantly, right? As when you watch a video, what should the next video be? That needs to be figured out right away. Data 2.0 felt like a Formula One car. The problem is the world in which we live looks like this. And if you want to move around in this, and this is Mojave Desert, a photo I took when I was doing my socially distancing vacation, camping in the Mojave Desert, the roads are not really conducive to that. You can't move fast. And in reality, there's one type of vehicle that does move fast in this world. So Data 1.0, Data 2.0, not really the great, but if you can mix them together, you end up with a Data 3.0 that looks something more like this. And so if you think about Baja Racing, this is Bryce Menzies' trophy truck. Think of it as 1,000 horsepower, being able to go in the desert 120 miles an hour where there's no paved roads and just fly off of everything. That's how we need to think about data in our businesses today. This is the kind of vehicle that we need for what we're in, the landscape we're in. This is not a pristine environment where there's a smooth racetrack that has no pebbles on it, let alone boulders and rocks and cactuses. This is kind of the world that we live in. And so if we bring in Data 3.0 to that same chart and look at what are the Data 3.0 challenges, and really this is not so much about the data now, it's more about the technologies that we're able to do and how we think about merging these two data sets together. I've begun to see a lot of businesses being interested in not just looking at their Data 1.0, looking at their ERP system or their CRM system, but asking, how can I bring that into my engagement metrics? And those could be social, they could be sensor data, there could be a whole slew of data sets that they want to bring in to augment with their Data 1.0 and a Data 2.0. At the same point though, Data 3.0, you still need accuracy. If you're looking at Data 1.0, you're going to need accuracy. You can't just say approximation is good. You need to be agnostic when it comes to data source. You need to not say, well, I can't handle 3NF or I can't handle large flattened data sets. You need to be agile and be able to move. And in this kind of world, if you want to be like those trophy trucks, you need to have optional data prep. It can't be extensive. There's still need to do it. Don't get me wrong. There's still times when you might want to do it, but it shouldn't be, okay, this is where we're going to spend 80% of our time is just building data pipelines. You want to spend 80% of your time actually getting insight into the data, engaging with the data. Data sharding. This is where I mentioned highly inefficient and Data 1.0, very efficient in Data 2.0. And there's a hybrid model in Data 3.0. And this is where we start to apply certain types of data sharding to certain types of data. To the Data 2.0, we use it. We can't use it on Data 1.0. It just does not work. That's the definition of how this data is being created. It's been optimized for lots of people doing lots of updates without treading on each other's toes. And as a result, it puts in some challenges when it comes to analytics, unless you want to go down this very expensive route of saying every project or every analytics with Data 1.0 is going to be an extensive journey down data pipelines and data prep. Closed loop decision making is something actually, yes, we want to be able to do that. We want to do more automation in our business. We want more things to be done automatically, but we also want discovery. We want to be able to look at our data and understand what's going on. And so what does an ideal 3.0 architecture look like? I say it looks something like this. There's data acquisition. I need to bring data into my system. I need to be able to do that very easily. I don't want to be writing code. I don't want to be sitting there doing that. I just want to click at things and bring it in. So I need automatic schema detection. I need this data to come in fast because you know what? I've got billions of records, terabytes of data sitting in my ERP systems. I need to be able to bring them in a parallel loading process. I need to be able to understand that. I need something like a direct data map, and a direct data map is a new approach around how you analyze that data to ensure that queries can be run very quickly across these kind of Data 1.0 data models. I need to be able to store that into a layer, something like Parquet, that's open, that's not a closed system, that I can use other tools if need be, that will play well in an ecosystem, because we need to future-proof. We don't know where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing next year. We don't even know what products and applications might be available to us next year. But having that stored in Parquet will ensure that any new software coming out, we'll be able to largely read that. We'll be able to leverage that. Couple that with a direct data map that's being stored, I'm able to get this analytics query performance that's unrivaled with other approaches. It's a way of understanding those join relationships between that data and ensuring that the fastest path between my data and my queries is always performed. This has been truly transformational. In this Data 3.0 architecture, we're seeing queries that in the traditional architectures, the Data 1.0s, that have been taking multiple hours, like 20 hours in some cases, being cut down to just a few minutes. In some cases, reports being run that take multiple, run the report, go and eat lunch and come back, are coming back in sub-seconds, because that data map is helping us understand exactly how these systems should work in terms of the queries, the performance, the runtime execution of those, everything. We need enterprise security, business views. We need a way to look at that data that's not in the weeds. We want visualization capabilities. I mentioned earlier about unified data analytics platforms. This is in essence what this is. And we need to play with other tools. But there's one big piece that we need to bring in as well, and that is the advanced data engineering. As I mentioned, there are times when you might want to use Python, R, Scala. You might want to do some kind of business transformation. You might want to run something like your fixed asset depreciation, not in your ERP system, because that's such an extensive process. It's actually more efficient to run it outside and then to push back that data through interface tables back to your ERP system. There's so many new and exciting ways that we're seeing these data 3.0 architectures being leveraged to solve business problems. And that is the key thing. It's that analytics is being used to really change business outcomes. And that should always be the mark of success, not yes, we were able to check the boxes, we delivered what was asked for. That's not going far enough. It's really saying, was that investment worthwhile? What was the return on our investment? So that's something that these Data 3.0 architectures are really enabled to do. And obviously, the project I'm part of in Quarter, this is how we see the world. But this architecture I'm laying out before you, while it's very much what in Quarter provides, this is what analysts are putting out there. This is something that we're seeing becoming more and more. So having this kind of holistic view on how you look at your data solutions is really, really key. And then obviously maintaining and managing this, there's in the cloud, or in some people want to do this still on premises and they want to be able to use maybe their own private cloud and be able to have the configuration tools that they need to make this happen. So kind of to bring this all around and to kind of bring us home here, I think we ultimately have a fiscal responsibility. We've been wasting, I say, money on the wrong projects for too long. And in some places, we don't even know that we're doing that. We think what we're doing is providing value because someone told us it is. But have we measured it? Do we really understand? And I think all of us don't want to waste money. We want to make sure we're putting money in the right projects, because at the end of the day, there's an opportunity cost. If we pick one project, to say yes to one thing is to say no to 1,000 things. To say no to one thing is to say no to one thing. That's what I always remind people is, what is the cost of saying yes to this project? What are we not doing? What are we missing out? How do we do more? I think all of us want to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing, that has impact and value, because at the end of the day, we want to be personally fulfilled. I'm sure all of us on this call go to work every day, hope, not because we just want to get a paycheck. We need a paycheck. But at the end of the day, we want to go home thinking that what we did contributed, what we did had value. And I think one of the saddest part is when I speak to people working in analytics, speaking to business, often they're so decoupled from the business, they never really know. They never really can put their finger on it and say, yeah, I did that. I actually helped change the business. Here is a business outcome. When I speak to often the technology folk, they don't know. The business side, sometimes they can't measure it because they don't have measures and metrics, because again, we don't think about measuring the effectiveness of our analytics as being a problem that we should apply analytics to. So think about, how can we apply analytics to figure out, is the analytics we're providing actually helping? And so that's what I thought would kick off with today. Like, thank you, everyone, for the time. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but if so, I'm happy to take some.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. I think it's a really interesting perspective on things. I think I would encourage everyone to follow Matthew on Twitter, go to LinkedIn and link in with him there. I think just out of respect for time here, Matthew, we'll probably keep some of the questions. We'll kind of route them to you afterwards and certainly get back to folks just so we can keep on the agenda. But love the message. I'm ready to run through a wall for Analytics 3.0 right now. So you got me on board. Hopefully the rest of the folks here on today's session really, that resonated with them as well. So thank you very much for your time, Matthew.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I appreciate it.
And just a reminder for everyone in today's conference, if you look at the chat window, and if you would like some free Encorta and ECAP kind of swag, fill out the form on the link, and we'll make sure to ship that to you directly. So, and with that, we're going to go ahead and enter into kind of our product highlight part of our conference here today. And so starting us off first will be Chris McPherson from IBM, giving us kind of a walkthrough on where Cognos Analytics is going, and some incorporation of how AI is kind of changing how they're going to market. So Chris, welcome here. I really appreciate the time today. The forum is yours.
Great, thanks very much, Ryan. I'm just trying to share my screen here. Are we all good?